Welcome to WP-Tonic, episode 189. Today we've got the immense pleasure of having as our guest, Zack Rosen, the SEO of Pantheon. Zack, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do.
Yeah, so Zack Rosen here in San Francisco. I co-founded Pantheon over 5 years ago with my good friends, Matt, Josh, and David. So it's the four of us. And before Pantheon, we ran a couple consulting companies. So Matt, Josh, and I started Chapter 3 here in San Francisco, and David started a consulting company in Texas called Four Kitchens. And then we also started a small bike manufacturer on the Lark. And essentially, the story of Pantheon is we were basically hired as consultants to build the same set of DevOps infrastructure about a dozen times for enterprise customers, like The Economist, who had 30 developers on staff and at these contract agencies, had a ton of traffic. And they needed to set up, all the caching systems and failover systems and hosting to support their high traffic site. But as importantly, the DevOps workflow. So the way you can have one developer working a feature over here and have another developer over here working on a different feature and be able to merge those changes and then test them and deploy them out without breaking the live site. So we essentially, as consultants, kind of specialized in DevOps consulting. And then we had the same experience for all these projects, which was we would be done with these infrastructure build outs. We give the infrastructure back to the client. And then they would say inevitably, like, what do I do with this stuff? And they would essentially, the pattern we saw was their IT teams really didn't have this kind of Drupal or WordPress DevOps expertise. And so the IT teams really couldn't manage it. And so what they would inevitably do would be go get their most senior web developer and then turn them into a sysadmin, which was no fun for them, not what they signed up to do, and kind of a waste of their top talent. So that was really the impetus to start Pantheon. The bet then and now was, why don't we just solve this once and for all with software? So just build a software system. Most of these projects were like in excess of $1 million in multiple cases. Take a year. That's way too much money for most of these site owners to come up with. Really complicated projects. And then at the end of the day, to do these massive projects and then give it back to the client, and they didn't have the skill set to manage it, was really unfulfilling as a consultant. And so the vision is we'll just solve all that with software, start a software service. And we ended up kind of bootstrapping the company out of the consulting company for the first year or so. And then really, at that point when we knew we had a valuable product, we had a lot of customers, to really build the platform the way we wanted to, we knew we had to raise venture capital. And so we did that and then ended up launching the service publicly in 2012.
No, most definitely. My co-host, Jonathan Denwood, introduce yourself. I know you have a question for Zack.
Oh, hi there, folks. I'm the founder of WP-Tonic. We're a maintenance support company that only works with WordPress. We've been part of the WordPress community for over 7 years now, and we'll be your trusted partner. Just a quick question, Zack. Hosting didn't seem the most exciting part of IT or IT infrastructure, really. It was a bit dour, but over the past, let's say, 4 or 5 years, innovation in hosting has just kind of bursted, with more innovation. Do you see that continuing in the next 3-4 years? Yeah,
to be upfront, we think hosting is going to get replaced by a new class of services. So the traditional hosting market that you see today, we think is going to get radically altered. And we think we're seeing the early stages of that right now. And I can give you kind of more of the thinking along that path. So, we start from the kind of highest level. So websites. So websites is about a $200 billion a year industry. It's actually a bigger industry than digital advertising. So many of your clients, I'd imagine, will spend quite a lot on their website and then not buy Google AdWords or Facebook ads because they actually get their traffic through just inbound. And then there are a lot of your clients who are spending a lot on Google AdWords, but where do they send that traffic? To the website, right? So they care about how that traffic converts. So there's a ton of spend on websites, and we think that's for obvious reasons, really. You know, as a marketer, really at the end of the day, your website is your most important digital marketing product, period. Right? It's the face of your business to the internet. And so, you know, rightly, businesses invest a lot in their website, and that's actually accelerating. You know, there's actually even above that, there's a transformation of business to become more and more digital, right? So the top 10 companies by market cap, I believe 4 of them now are technology companies. This mega trend is kind of driving that as well. But if you you know, actually look at you know, customers that have really embraced, they're really good at digital marketing and have kind of embraced the best practices of digital marketing. And this is to get back to your question around hosting. The commonality that we see is they innovate on their website like modern software companies innovate on their product, right? So they don't just kind of, you know, I think the old way of building websites is you hire a team or hire a consultant when the business is being formed, or when you have a new marketer comes on board. You spend months designing the site, and then you kind of building all the comps, and then you engage a consultant or team to go build it, and then you put it on the internet, and boom, that's your website. No one touches it for 2 years. As you probably know, generally, I mean, that will check the box. I have a website, right? You can find me on the internet, which is better than no website, certainly. But the companies who actually are really good at digital marketing, they don't do that. Right? What they do is they're constantly iterating on their website. They're trying new things, trying new designs. They're A/B testing. They're doing, you know, constant SEO performance improvements. Every time they launch any new product, it comes with new marketing content and landing pages, and it's a living, breathing thing. And back to hosting, the problem is traditional hosting doesn't solve that problem. Traditional hosting is for the first case, which is I have a website on the internet. But what you really need to make websites work for your business is a way to iterate easily on your website and deal with the uncertainty around the internet. Like, you don't know when you're going to get a traffic spike, right? So whatever provider you have needs to be able to deal with it. If it's tomorrow or 2 months, you don't have time to like plan ahead. You just have to be able to absorb that big traffic spike. And you need to be able to iterate very quickly and know that as you're iterating, you're not breaking things as you go. And so we think there's actually going to be a new class of services, of which we are one, that actually solves that problem versus kind of the traditional hosting approach, which we think is designed to solve a different era of problems.
I love how you put that, Zach, where you say that a lot of people, they spend more, and you're saying like in the category itself, the more people spend money on designing, building, and maintaining websites than they actually do on digital marketing. But what are they driving it to? Are they driving it to a site that is built once and then never updated again in 2 years? Or are they building it to a living, breathing organism, which of course, savvy marketers understand that their website is really replacing the yellow pages, the business card, and all that thing is their most important marketing asset. And so flexible hosting that is supporting like an active marketing department is so important. One thing that I wanted to ask you is, playing into that, your goal at Pantheon is to host 1/3 of all web traffic. And my question to you is, how did you come up with that goal? And also, how do you see the path to getting there?
Yeah, so we figured if we made the goal any higher, we don't want to get too greedy, right? So we just called it at 30%. It's a good question, and I think that the reason we have, we're about the real goal is to get to 1% within the next, 3 to 4 years, and we're actually tracking towards that. So, to get to 30% will take many years, decades, really. But to answer the question, so and back to hosting a little bit. So again, websites is a $200 billion a year market. It's a huge market, but unlike most other software categories, so office software or search engines or social networking, there to date really aren't large scale, like truly large scale services and vendors that have 5, 10, 20, 30% of the market. If you look at almost any other established software vertical, really web is a huge outlier. To have this big and established and important of an industry without true market leaders is kind of nuts. And our view on the market is we're not going to we think it's and not to rag on the web too much, but the example I use is here in San Francisco. For some reason, if you've ever been on the BART, you actually can get really good internet service on the BART on a train going between stations, which is kind of nuts when you think about it. And you can be on a phone on a BART, and it's happening many times. You're reading Twitter, and you click a link, and the website doesn't work, or it's not formatted for mobile. And you think about that, that's nuts, right? Because I'm on an LTE, and every 5 years, the generation of cell technology is going to get 50% better. And that iPhone, iPhones didn't exist, a decade ago, and every 2 years it gets 50% better. And Twitter didn't exist 10 years ago, and they're constantly iterating the product. And get down to it, the weakest, even the CPU and the phone, we're still eking out constant improvement. But you get down to it, the website is the weakest link in that entire stack. And fundamentally, I know why that website didn't render or why it's not online. It's because essentially the way we've been hosting and building websites is other than the rise of content management, which is important. Other than that, it's essentially the same way we've been doing this for 25 years, right? There's just not been the kind of unlocking of value in the market that you've seen really on every other major part of the software industry. And so to get back to your question of why 30%, we want to play a role in that, right? We really want to help bring websites and running websites and creating great websites to the modern era of software as a service. And the way to do that is, the best way to do that in our view is to build a really great service that actually can get to real scale. And real scale is not as a couple percent, but as tens of percents of the web. And so that's the ultimate goal for the company. And it serves as a really useful tool to us internally in terms of how we actually build, what actual software are we building and what is the intended purpose of it, right? There's a lot of things you can imagine we could do that might make sense in the short term, but actually might make it harder for us to achieve the end goal that we have. And so we try to take a really long-term view on how we're actually building the product.
Nope, makes a lot of sense. And speaking to what you're saying, when sites get a lot of traffic, the website is the weakest link in the chain. But you guys have kind of specialized in having elastic hosting, cloud hosting, and you even have a resource, the scalewp.io, where it gives hints for having WordPress or Drupal at scale. What are things that your customers don't know about having sites that are really performance driven at scale?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and there's no short answer to it. So if you're okay, I'll give you kind of a longer answer. So I think, the way we look at it is, and this is back to traditional hosting. So traditional hosting, quick overview, essentially the same technology model for the last 20 years. On the cheap end, you have shared hosting. And so with shared hosting, you're literally tenanted with other customers on the same underlying infrastructure, traditionally with very little separation. So if Jim has a bad day, you're going to have a bad day, and that'll bring down your website, right? So the reliability of shared hosting is not great. If you're not paying very much and your website, you're not a very large company, you might not care if your website goes down a lot. But for businesses where they have marketing teams, generally shared hosting is just too unreliable for them. You have other issues with shared hosting, like if you get too much traffic or you're trying to scale, you're locked into a single machine and you're literally limited in your ability to scale beyond the resources of that single machine. And in fact, what they do is try to constrain your resources so you don't mess with other customers on the same end server. So that's why typically shared hosting is pretty slow, not very scalable, but it is cheap. So typically customers graduate from there to kind of BPS hosting, so DigitalOcean or on Lightsail on Amazon or AWS or Linode. The great thing about BPS hosting is you have a fair amount of assurance. So there's protection between your BPS and someone else's BPS. So if Jim has a bad day, you won't necessarily have a bad day. And you might have more resources available to you in that BPS, more than likely. The problem with VPS is you have the same issues of scale, so and single points of failure. So if you want to serve out more traffic than a single server can do, you can't do that. And if that server goes down that your website's running on, your site's going to go offline. And so what customers who have a lot of needs around scalability and want reliability, where they can actually absorb servers coming online or going going offline and be able to not take the website down, they typically work with clusters. But clusters cost, and if you have experience with clusters, is thousands of dollars a month, and it's a lot of overhead, and it's very complex. And you deal with cases like when you're developing on your local laptop, you have no idea how that change to that site will perform when you push it live on the cluster, because in the cluster there's a network architecture and a hop between the database and the application. And so you have to deal with all these edge cases as you kind of develop changes for clustered hosting. But back to hosting providers, the fundamental issue with hosting providers, and this is the central thing we knew at the beginning we needed to avoid to do what we wanted to do, we've been able to do it successfully, is from a hosting vendor's perspective, when they get to thousands or tens of thousands of customers, what you inevitably end up with is this kind of mess of some customers on shared hosting, some customers on VPSs, enterprise customers on clusters, and it's completely heterogeneous. And the way the cluster is configured is slightly different than the way the VPS for this customer is configured. And literally you get up to our competitors have tens of thousands of different servers they're trying to keep online, each in some cases a little different. And then the only way to solve that is with humans. So you basically pay to have a lot of sysadmins kind of running around, keeping all those servers online and making sure the configurations are fine between different server instances. So when customers have issues with performance or scalability, that's what you're running into, right? You're running into issues of like, well, you didn't, for this particular server, we didn't have varnish set up correctly. Or you had more traffic than the server could deal with, so we got to move you over to cluster, and now it's going to cost thousands of dollars a month to deal with you. Or you're running fine until Jim had a problem on the server, and that's what took you offline. So all of these different kind of cases kind of bubble up to the surface. So for us, we knew we needed to build Pantheon in a way where customers wouldn't have to deal with any of that, where literally they could just build their website and know that it will work. It'll be reliable and it'll be scalable. And if they get traffic spikes of 10 or 100x or the median, they can weather that without messing with anything. So one of my favorite examples is, as of late, ACLU, which is a great organization. I'm a fan of theirs personally, but proud to have them as a customer. They have the case study up on our website. They, in the course of basically 3 days, they raised more money through their website than they did in an entire year before that. Their traffic spike they actually got 85x their normal traffic overnight, which is a great problem to have typically, but typically honestly the kind of problem that literally brings your website down. You can imagine that if it's like you're getting like a once in a 20-year event, we're going to raise more money in 3 days than you have in the past year. But you got so popular, your website goes down, you can't raise that money. Like that is the hosting world everyone's used to dealing with, which is insane. So Pantheon, we knew we wanted to be able to handle use cases like that. And we knew we wanted to have something that was scalable to get to 1%, 10%, 30% of the web, and be much like orders of magnitude simpler to manage. And so we ended up building a platform in a very different way that other hosting companies have not done, which is, namely, we built Pantheon with this technology called containers, which as of late, containers are starting to become much more known in the world of infrastructure management. But what containers let us do is to give you what we call fair resource isolation between every environment of every site. It's like having a VM for every single application environment. So we have resource isolation. So you can write the dumbest SQL query you want in dev. It's not going to take down your live site. And whatever Jim does on the server does not affect your live site or your dev site or your test site. But the other key is what we call smooth scaling. So it lets us take you from 1 container to 2 containers to 4 containers to 10 containers without any human intervention. It's all done automated in software. And we can scale you out horizontally without moving any of your data to a new server or setting up a new cluster or having a system in touch anything. It's all just done on the platform. And so what, essentially what we've worked very hard to do and have done successfully is replace all these traditional pain points of hosting and scalability and performance with really good software. And the great thing about software is it's very efficient and very scalable. And what that means for the customers is it's cheaper and a lot less headache. It just happens.
No, that's very excellent. And something that you mentioned too, traditionally we're used to a hosting world where we're being served choices of either shared hosting, VPS, or clusters. And one thing that we run into a lot is we run into clients where they have hosting that doesn't necessarily fit their needs, or somebody steered them toward something that maybe doesn't, fit their use case. But at Pantheon, you guys specialize in hosting for enterprise companies, hosting for educational institutions, a lot of Drupal and WordPress hosting there. But also, you've done a lot of outreach to agencies. And when it comes to, agency outreach, educating them about how Pantheon is different and educating people about the different hosting solutions out there and what makes you guys distinct. When it comes to that, agencies should really be immersed in the technology, and how are your outreach efforts, working inside the WordPress ecosystem, and what kind of effect has that had on getting new signups and getting new clients of a larger stature?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think of all the things I spend time thinking about in the company, I think number one on my list every day is education. It's actually meeting with developers through WordPress events or at these agencies and having in-depth conversations with them about how they do their work. So a good example of this is, and what we rely on with our product, which is kind of different than traditional hosting, we actually give away the tools, our dev tools, for free to developers. And we actually have a product built specifically for agencies that is also free for them to use. The reason we do this is we know, I'm sure you guys know this too, like developers who develop sites with WordPress and Drupal are used to a tool chain that's open source and free, right? And if we have to pay even $100 a month or $50 a month, it's a serious barrier to getting developers to understand your technology and to use it. And so that's why we give the platform away for free to any developer who wants to use it. You sign up, and create an account. You can use all of our developer tools for free. We charge when the hosting piece comes in. So when we actually launch a site, that's when we actually ask for a credit card and start billing. But that can happen months after you actually start developing sites. So with a lot of WordPress developers, the first conversation we actually have isn't even about hosting. It's usually about workflow. So specifically, I don't know if you guys are running into this with your clients, but you have a website up and running, and you want to make changes to that website, like add a new plugin or develop a new feature with the theme. But meanwhile, like your client is constantly updating new content on the website. The database is constantly changing, right? So how are you actually going to deploy a net new feature to that website, but know that it works before you deploy it, but don't have to take down the website and say, hey, client, for the next 24 hours, please don't add any more content, or ignore what's happening behind the current curtains while you update your website. So that's what I mean by workflow. It's like literally the way you work on an active client website. And so what we key to our product, if you ever used it, is we have what we think of it is the best practice workflow for WordPress out of the box. So what it lets you do is anytime you develop a net new feature for the client websites, like you change the theme, you can click a button and push and pull in the latest content from the live site. So you can test that change against like literally the freshest content from the live site, but push up the latest code change you've made to a representative test environment. Make sure that it works. You can even ask the client, like, hey, does this look right? Can I get your approval? And then click a button and deploy it out to the live website, knowing that it works. And this gets you out a lot of issues of like breaking the live site when you're trying to develop things, or not having the freshest content to test against, or the client not knowing what's going on, and meanwhile they're updating content and you stomp over the content with less fresh content. They have to go rewrite that content. All of that complexity, we work really hard to just make bulletproof. That's the first way we usually engage with agency developers, is like literally like how you use our workflow, and the best practice around that. And then we build on that in terms of like how you do parallel feature development, and then how do you set up sites to use our caching system so that they're very scalable, and set up HTTPS and all these other things.
I'm glad you mentioned that. And you know, one last question before we go to our midway break. But when you're talking about the workflow, and that is like a big problem, and especially on a larger site, you're making changes to the actual code base. The client is uploading content, but you've got to deploy these features, and having that kind of more complex system of having merges and stuff like this, where you can test and then deploy instead of having to just have you know, one staging in one production area, is very useful. And it's not something that every other hosting company is doing. It's not easily replicatable. Another thing that I think is really awesome that you guys have is a multi-dev, where you can have, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's you know, different developers on your team, they have their individual branches, and they can also like merge into that. And speak on that for just a second. Yeah, so once we get past generally kind of the basic or kind of general workflow for developing with client websites where the content is changing, the next thing exactly we talk about is what we call multi-dev. So what it's built to do, exactly right, is to do parallel feature development. So if you have multiple developers working on a project, now the workflow generally becomes even more complicated, because you have feature A over here and feature B over here, and then you have a hot fix that has to come out. And how are you going to safely get all these features merged in, test, and deployed out without stomping on each other's work? And so that's what multi-dev is designed to do. So what it does is actually very simple. You can click a button in our dashboard and get a new multi-dev cloud environment. And what you, it's literally has its own URL, its own feature branch with the code, its own copy of the database, its own copy of the files. You can load it up, and it's yours. You can call it, you know, John's multi-dev or John's feature A multi-dev. You can call it whatever you want, and you can work on your feature, and fresh, you know, be pulling in the latest content on the live site, making sure that it works, make sure it works, and then be done with the feature, and then test it, and then get client approval, and then deploy it out whenever you want. At the same time, other developers are also working on their own features. So all this parallel feature development can happen in a very clean way, and in a way that where you're not stomping on each other's work. And what we found is for websites that are built by teams, so this is very typical of agencies where they have like a front-end developer working on a theme, a back-end developer working on the actual WordPress code and building plugins. They each can work on their own feature branches, not stop on each other's work, and then deploy them out whenever they want. No, I think that's an absolutely essential feature for larger teams. We're going to take 5 seconds for where we insert our break, and then when we come back, we're going to be talking more with Zack Rosen, the CEO of Pantheon. See you in just a second. We're coming back from the break, and I'm going to pass the mic over to Jonathan Denwood and take it away.
Oh, thanks, John. So, Zack, you know, your initial noted in the Drupal community, and then you've entered the WordPress community. What have been the differences in culture and community that you've noticed between those two communities? Yeah,
I mean, I actually say it's more similar than different. You know, when in the early days of our support for WordPress projects, we kind of likened it to like, you know, visiting an alien species where everything is kind of the same but very different, and like we had this whole imagery around it. And actually, it turned out we're both aliens. Like it's just have some different experiences. But at the end of the day, like the people that build websites and client deadlines and requirements and the way like developing sites with PHP, it's all so similar. But there are some differences. I think the way we see this is Drupal's focus right now, and increasingly so, is typically on these more complicated websites. So like, and the Drupal has built this API that a lot of it's a more complicated system to develop for. It's really just built for these kind of power users and power use cases, where WordPress is much more broadly applicable, obviously, right? So kind of if your requirements are met by WordPress, it is 9 times out of 10 or more the obvious product to use. It's much simpler to use out of the box. It has typically a better user experience for the end user, and you can kind of start and get a website finished out the door for much less time, much less cost than a typical Drupal development project would be. But what that means is really interesting. So in the WordPress space, there's this whole, when we show up at WordCamps, the large US one or these local WordCamps, the breadth of folks who show up is much broader than Drupal, right? The users actually show up at the community events. A lot of folks who use WordPress as bloggers or professional bloggers, and then you have kind of hobbyist developers, and then professional developers and at agencies and whole teams. The whole kind of spans the gamut. Where in the Drupal universe, when you show up at these events and you talk to folks in the Drupal universe, it's a much thinner slice. It's really just kind of some hobbyists, but mostly professionals, and then up through kind of folks who manage thousands of sites for big enterprises. But when we actually talk to professional developers, so not the end users, but the people actually whose job it is to build websites, it really is very, very similar. I think you could you guys could show up at these Drupal events, and Drupal folks that show up at the WordPress events, and it's amazing how similar the problem sets are and the approaches.
I thought it was fantastic. Well, I'm going to go down this, but if you don't want to go down this road, well, I'm going to ask a question, and yeah, go on. Obviously, you had some slight troubles with WordCamp USA around communication. What did you learn from that?
That's a fair question. I think we're still learning really how we can best participate in the WordPress community. I think we came in the Drupal community already with 7 years of like knowing everybody, knowing all the norms, knowing the conferences, knowing all the people, knowing all the agencies, and it was a very easy, natural thing. And to be fair, like in the WordPress space, what the community wants to get out of the events versus what Drupal wants to get out of the events, actually pretty different. Like that is a case where it's actually pretty different. We just came back from DrupalCon, which is a great event, but it's if you go down to like the exhibit hall at DrupalCon, it's kind of mind-blowing. Close to 3,500 people came to the event. Every single one of them makes a living off of Drupal. Like they're all like professionals at agencies or internal. That's the only people show up. And as part of that, the kind of vendor ecosystem is in a lot of ways just kind of just bigger and more established in a lot of ways than the WordPress ecosystem vendor community. And just the norms around the conference are different. What people expect, like a lot of people go to the exhibit hall. We had well over, we had thousands of people who actually came to our booth and participated with us at our booth, just crazy, like sat through a 30-minute product demonstration. So it's just more commercialized. And I think in the WordPress community, for some of the attendees, that's true. And then for some of the attendees, it's not true. And I think it's just part of the evolution of the WordPress community is, I think you have to wrestle with this to a certain extent of like, what is the purpose of the event? what are we trying to do as a community, and what is the role of a vendor here or there. And that's, I think that my observation would be that WordPress is still kind of early in building out its approach to the different audiences who come to the event. So we would love to participate in that and help in any way. I mean, we're a company, but we are also, as part of that, like have a lot of WordPress experts who work at our company, DevOps experts who work at the company, who show up, present, participate in Birds of a Feather, participate in the community. But then there's also, like, as a vendor, how we participate as a company. And so we're 100% open to feedback. We're very invested in the WordPress, and we're very excited about the WordPress community, and really, like, genuinely want to be good participants. I think we really do pride ourselves in how we've approached building community overall at the company. Really, it's just driven the business that we built is a very real connection with our users and our customers and the agencies that we work with, and the wider open source community. And we have a lot of experience doing that. And so, we would love to do whatever we can to be helpful. Any input people have, I'm all ears.
Oh, fantastic answer. Yeah. Let's move on. So I was really interested in answer to one of John's questions about you explaining the size of the website industry in dollars, and how, and I totally agreed with what you were saying, that a website is an ongoing thing, a living organism in some ways. There seems to be, to me, this is a bit of a long-winded observation and also partly a question. There seems to be conflicting forces. In some ways, websites have been commodified, but on the other hand, the thing that you were pointing out, they're definitely not. They need. Am I correct? There seems to be two kind of forces working.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, and we, and I'd actually observe those forces are really, I think, the industry maturing. So we break the industry into really roughly into three broad strokes. And we divide it by who the customer is. So on one end of the spectrum, you have the Wixes and the Weebly's and the Squarespaces and WordPress.coms of the world, where the customer, the person actually paying for the product or using the service, is the website owner, right? So they sign up for the service, they choose a design template, they swipe their credit card or use it for free, hit a button, hit publish, boom, they have a website. The website's gonna have the same design as everyone else who uses the same template. But if you're paying nothing, or $5 a month or $10 a month, you don't care, right? As a small business, you check the box. I have a website. You can edit the content yourself. Your website will probably look pretty, if using a modern service, will look pretty good because there'll be a modern design template you're working from, and you're good to go. So that part of the industry is very quickly evolving. And if you look at like what Wix is doing and Squarespace and WordPress.com, like it's, the bar for what is good for that use case is going up and up and up and up and up each year. I mean, 3 years ago or 4 years ago, good was signing up for GoDaddy, buying a domain name, dealing with their different at the time they got much better, but at the time very rough kind of template tools, and that was a website. But now, like the bar is much higher, and to their credit, I think GoDaddy's invested a lot in this, and it's come very far. But that's a customer segment. And we think that customer segment is, again, where the owner of the website, the person paying for the website, owns the business, mostly sole proprietorships. There's a next segment of the marketplace, and we think the dividing line to the next segment of the marketplace is when you actually have a professional marketer, right? You have somebody who has a budget, who's not the owner of the business, but their job is marketing. And so they might own like inbound SEO marketing, they probably own the website, they own the advertising campaigns, but their job is to drive business, right? And they're professional. So typically those marketers, it's not entirely true, but it's mostly true, that those marketers can't really use those template tools. If you talk to a marketer, it's generally not acceptable that you have this literally the same brand and look and feel of your business as the 500,000 other businesses that happen to use the same design template. It's just not adequate. And so what the way those marketers actually create their websites, as you know, is they start with their brand and their design, and they do Adobe Photoshop comps, and they hire experts to design and build websites with their own set of requirements, and they write RFPs about how they're going to use this marketing automation software and this email list vendor, and it's, you know, and they show up and hire folks like you to actually build the site. So that's another segment of the market. And then there's another segment of the market, the third, which are actually real enterprises. So these are the customers who are spending literally $3, $4, $5 million per website, right? And so it's Adobe CQ, you know, Sitecore, Acquia, one of our friends in Boston in the Drupal space, really competes for this kind of business where you know, millions of dollars to spend, and there's whole teams internally and externally, very complicated requirements, usually need compliance and governance and all these kind of enterprise features. And frankly, WordPress really doesn't compete there yet. The exception, I'd say, would be some media companies. There's some large-scale media companies that have large budgets where WordPress does compete. For the most part, there's no one really selling WordPress yet in enterprise use cases, where Drupal is actually being sold with enterprise customers. So those are the three different segments. And in each of those segments, I think there is an ecosystem and a kind of state-of-the-art and expectation for the customers. And in each of those segments, there is you know, some rate of evolution of the vendors people are using. So sorry, long answer to your question.
Oh, you can keep on talking. I'm just,
so the first I think you're saying is the self-serve sole proprietor use case. The vendors there are getting so sophisticated that a lot of the use cases that people have historically used WordPress and shared hosting for, which is literally, I'm a business owner, give me a website. There's competition now, where what you can do with Wix and Squarespace and Weebly is just getting better and better and better, to the point where WordPress might be more complicated for that use case than an alternative, right? So that's that pressure. But at the same time, if you hop over to the next market segment of marketers, I think WordPress is actually early in its adoption curve. I think that there's that space is growing very quickly, and those marketers, the biggest thing holding WordPress back is the sophistication of the vendors actually providing services to those customers. And I think that if you look at the kind of market growth, so the ecosystem on WordPress, people who make a living around WordPress, I think more growth is actually going to come from that part of the market than the sole proprietor part of the market over the next 5 years.
Oh, just fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I will have to think what you're saying, but my instinctive reaction is I totally agree with you. Have you got a couple more questions, John? Because I need to think.
No, it is definitely, and like what you said, Zach, I totally agree. I think that mid-market where people are targeting like people who are professional marketers, or a lot of times businesses that have a dedicated marketing department, I think that WordPress is early on that adoption curve. And I think that's like really like where a lot of WordPress professionals should be aiming, honestly.
Yeah.
One last question, and then we'll let you get on with your day. But something I wanted to ask you about is a lot of times with the companies, and I know that you guys have grown like over the years, but what gets you to one place doesn't get you to the next level. And one thing that I know that you've done in learning about how to grow a company is shadowing like other SEOs and just watching them and following their day. What are some other things that you've done to kind of prepare yourself for growth as Pantheon grows from one level to the next?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Something I thought about it a lot. And I've written a couple things around this. So my experience building companies, especially technology companies, the thing I think that's kind of underappreciated here in San Francisco or Silicon Valley is how much of this industry, really, when you boil it down, is really just about mentorship. Really, like one more experienced entrepreneur or investor helping a younger, less wise entrepreneur on the problem that they're trying to solve. Really, when I get down to it, like most of there's a lot of learning that I do, which is like falling on my face, making a mistake, and like, oh, that didn't work. Next time I'm facing this problem, I'm going to try something differently. I'm going to go Google things and read online, all that kind of stuff. But I'd say that 2/3 of my learning or more is literally just mentorship. It's someone saying, oh yeah, I dealt with that 4 years ago. Here's a post I wrote about it. Or I'm going to walk you through exactly how it, once I ask you a bunch of questions, understand what it's going to be like in your shoes. I'm going to walk you through exactly how I would tackle that problem that you're dealing with right now. And so that's where the CEO shadowing comes in. It's a way of kind of seeing face to face and being there in the room with a team or another CEO with their own set of problems and challenges that they're having to solve themselves, and seeing their approach to it, which really is just mentorship. It's just another form of mentorship. So, in my day-to-day, I've made a lot of effort to find really good mentors, and then and beg them and cajole them and convince them to help us with the problems that we're trying to solve. And I found that I found people to be honestly incredibly generous with their time. My experience has been, not all the time, but usually people will be incredibly generous, helping me work through something, whatever it is in the day-to-day that I'm trying to sort through on my own.
I think that's excellent, and I think mentorship is something that we all could benefit from. So glad to hear you say that. With that, we're going to wrap up this episode. And Zack, where can we find you online and anything that you would like to promote?
Yeah, I'm zacker.org, or I'm at Zack on Twitter if you want to tweet at me. Otherwise, I'm just Zack at ZACK at Pantheon.io if you want to send me an email.
Sounds great. Jonathan, where can we find you and anything you want to promote? Oh, before that, just to say, Zack, I just really enjoyed the interview. It's been a blast, and your insights have been so interesting. How you can get hold of me, folks, on Twitter at Jonathan Denwood. I'm normally around here most days, aren't I, John? Or you can email me. I do, if it's obviously somebody that's spent time to ask me a question or need a little bit of help, I'm always there for you, folks. It's just a personal courtesy. You probably won't get answers straight away that day, but I will come back. And that's at Jonathan at WP-Tonic.com.
And one more thing, John, I'd say if anyone listening was interested in the workflow conversation or performance, I definitely encourage them to sign up for Pantheon. It's 100% free, totally free to use as a developer or as an agency. And we're happy to help you use the tools. If you have any questions, you can just open our chat support. So go check it out if you haven't.
No, definitely. And I second that endorsement. I've played around with it before too. It's definitely an impressive tool. I think a lot of agencies, especially larger ones, would benefit from checking it out, and definitely if you're dealing with any larger clients, for sure, give it a spin. You can find me on Twitter, lockdown_. You can visit me at my website, which is lockdowndesign.com. For the WP-Tonic posse, we're saying peace out and get your dose.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Zack.